I never could sit still. I remember just sitting at my desk during school, tapping my fingers and my feet in a vain attempt to stay awake. Naturally, these started off sporadic and wild, mimicking a horse's trot or normal footsteps. I especially liked the sounds my shoes would make on the ground, but I was often scolded to not do so. Soon the tapping developed a rhythm, first a simple waltz and then syncopated beats. Beginning in middle school, I proved myself more than capable in reading and writing. By 7th grade, I was reading near college level and had shown a great aptitude for history and the sciences, often completing my work and homework in time to use the remaining 5 hours spent in school for sleep. Although at first this proved difficult for me, as I was often jostled awake by the loud and thunderous slam of a book onto my desk. The teachers took notice and would often separate me from my peers. As such, I often spent most of my time in a form of detention, away from all others. So it is only natural that I'd go on to surround myself with my own forms of studies. Although one would think that I would surely prove a capable scholar, my lonesome mind wandered unto the path of the occult. I became stumped coming out of high school, as I had not the means, tools, or connections to further my research. Deciding to do what any young person does when faced with no discernible life direction to orient towards, I enrolled in Hermes's Luminary Institute, majoring in business with a minor in historical alchemy studies. Hermes's Luminary Institute is a university located 50-odd miles to the east of Dubois, Pennsylvania, a small university that takes up the majority of the city that is more akin to a small but bustling town. I was only there for 3 years before I dropped out. I had exhausted all classes pertaining to old occult knowledge, and most only covered the ideas of ancient Greek Hermeticism and alchemy. I was not at all interested in the economy. I saw it nothing more as a giant beast fueled only by debt and credit. However, through these classes is how I met my dearest friend and mentor, James von Rollins. When I met Rollins, I was 20 and he was 13 years my senior. He was a professor with a PhD in sociology, teaching a class on Chaldean oracles. I was immediately intrigued by the man when he introduced himself on the first day of class. He carried himself with a certain air of confidence that I had not seen in anyone till that day. Seemingly, the school had placed him there because they didn't have anyone qualified to teach on the subject. How could he be so sure of himself? My young hubris was only checked by an intense curiosity that would rival even the greatest of explorers. As such, it wasn't long before I introduced myself to him personally outside of the class environment. It was then I realized the man I was speaking to wasn't just an average person trying to make ends meet with their degree, but rather someone who knew a lot more than what I could even think of. At no point did he ever seem worried of trivial day-to-day things, nor surprised by the actions of others. After having known the man for 5 years and spent that time studying everything from Goetia and theurgy to astrology and Kabbalah, it was during this time that Rollins became not only a mentor to me but a dear friend, and I began to see the world in a different light, with new depths and layers of understanding. Together, we explored the mysteries of the universe, delving into ancient texts and seeking knowledge from obscure sources. Through him, I found a sense of purpose and direction that had eluded me before. And though my time with him was brief, the lessons he taught me have stayed with me to this day. During the 5 years that I knew Rollins, I never suspected that he was struggling with depression. His wife was stunning, his children were well behaved, and he always appeared calm and content. He never seemed to be hiding behind a facade, instead projecting an aura of everything's all right. Rollins had many friends and connections, not only in the occult, but also in many fields such as politics and various industries. Despite having all the resources at his disposal, Rollins was secretly consumed by a deep, cold, and unimaginably sorrowful darkness that chills me to the bone whenever I think about it. He never spoke of this to anyone, as I later learned. I have a vivid memory of that day in March when I visited my mentor's house to ask him about the authenticity of a copy of the Necronomicon I had recently acquired. It had become somewhat of a running joke between us, as I had already approached him 4 times before with similar claims. On 2 of those occasions, I had even convinced myself that I had finally obtained the genuine article, and excitedly called my mentor to announce that I possessed the rarest of all occult books. Of course, I had been mistaken each time, but Rollins always found my enthusiasm amusing. However, on this cold March morning, there were no birds chirping, cars honking, people talking, nor the always present sound of the railcar service factory that you could hear for miles outside of the town. Just the omnipresent chilling howl of wind. As I walked to the door, I noticed it was ever so slightly open, and a hideous stench emanating from the small crack between the door and the frame. I opened the door only to find everything gone. I stared at the almost barren living room for what felt like hours, until I finally noticed that the only things left were Rawlins's favorite paintings. They were particularly serene paintings. One was of a ripple in the sea, as if some mighty being had cast a 3-ton boulder off the cliff in its background into the green-colored sea below. I made my way into the kitchen and found 2 handwritten notes on the counter. One was to Rawlins from his wife, and the other was to me from Rawlins. I read the one from his wife first, as I felt that these two had to be interconnected. As I unfolded the letter, I was struck by the neatness of her handwriting. The letters were meticulously formed, each one perfectly spaced from the next. I could almost feel the precision in each stroke of the pen, as if she had taken great care to ensure that every word was just so. Her hand was remarkably steady, creating delicate loops and curves that flowed seamlessly from one to the next. It was as if the words themselves were dancing across the page, imbuing each one with a sense of grace and elegance. "You are the problem," were the last words on her letter. Even though I had no personal connection to his wife, I couldn't help but feel a deep and twisting pain in my chest. It was the kind of pain that you know isn't real, but still makes you sick. My heart dropped into my intestines, and an uneasy queasiness twisted my stomach into knots. When I read the note, all it said was, "Sorry, old friend." I hastily stumbled into his room, swinging the door open, but what I saw made me freeze. My dear friend lay on the bed, lifeless and covered in vomit. His right arm hung off the bed, and under it was a bottle of whiskey. On the nightstand beside his bed was an empty bottle of benzodiazepines. I had seen enough. My heart, my soul, and my mind were forever broken in a way that no therapist or lover could ever heal. I went back into the kitchen, grabbed the landline phone, dialed 911, and left the receiver hanging by its cord. I then walked out of the house, closed the door, and went back to my 1-bedroom apartment. For 3 days and 3 fortnights, I didn't sleep and barely ate. I spent those long, excruciating hours kicking, screaming, crying, wailing, and cursing God in despair. My heart felt like it was being torn apart, and my mind was consumed by a searing, unrelenting pain. Then, in desperation, I begged him to take it all away to make the agony stop. On the 7th night, I looked at my dingy apartment, I reflected on my current isolation, and I realized that it was time for me to leave Dubois. I packed very little, just a change of clothes, 8 pairs of socks, 6 shirts, 12 pairs of underwear, and 4 pairs of jeans. My wardrobe was small, and I didn't have a lot of belongings that I cared to take anyways. I only packed what I would need. For a moment, I considered staying for Rawlins's funeral, but I didn't want to subject myself to that pain. I would later learn that no one even attempted to plan or coordinate his funeral, and no one but the preacher was present. This would make me feel guilty, but I was thankful he wasn't around to notice the lack of care afforded to him after life. So I set out on my journey. I began to explore other towns and cities, each with its own unique charm and atmosphere. I was searching for something, perhaps a sense of belonging or a new mentor to guide me on my path. Along the way, I met many interesting people and learned about their experiences, their cultures, and their beliefs. I met a Ukrainian fleeing persecution from the Russian government while I was traveling through Scranton. She had told me about her mother, who was living near Hartford, Connecticut, who knew much more about old herbal recipes and cultural legends than she. With that, I began my trek to Hartford. While traveling, I reflected on my life, motives, beliefs, and ideas of what life is and why I was even created. As I reflected on my past, I found myself reminiscing about my childhood and the state of public education in America. It saddened me to think about the limitations and shortcomings of the system that had once shaped me. My thoughts then turned to my upbringing and the unique circumstances that led to my existence. My parents hadn't planned on having me. I was the result of a night of carelessness and too much alcohol. Despite this, they believed that my conception was a divine sign, prompting them to marry. 8 months after I was born, they tied the knot, and they remained together throughout my childhood, a rarity in today's world. What was even more unusual about my family was its structure. My father and mother shared an equal partnership in their relationship and raised me with the belief that all men and women were created equal in the eyes of the Lord. This unconventional approach to family dynamics and their unwavering support provided me with a solid foundation as I navigated the complexities of life. It wasn't until I left home for college that my parents divorced. I had always been aware of my mother's struggles with her mental health. A deep-rooted paranoia gnawed at her, causing her to gradually lose trust in everyone around her. Over time, this extended to my father as well, especially after I had departed for my studies. Eventually, I found myself in the town of Unionville, situated a few miles west of Hartford. In desperate need of an ale to soothe my weary heart after the long and strenuous journey, I ventured into Red's Mouth Tavern. Serendipitously, I happened to sit next to the father of the Ukrainian woman I had encountered earlier. He initiated conversation the moment I ordered my ale, and as I recounted my situation and my meeting with his daughter, he inquired about her name. Upon my response, he recognized that I was speaking of his daughter, and I simultaneously realized I had just met her father. The unexpected connection led to us sharing stories and reminiscing about life, loss, and the pursuit of meaning. As the night progressed, he divulged the reason for his presence in Unionville. He was a member of a secret society that operated within the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. I asked about the herbal remedies his daughter had mentioned, to which he wrote a few down a napkin and gave to me. I explained to him that I was a student of the occult myself, though I did not belong to any secret society. He would go on to tell me of a society located in the mountains of West Virginia that was searching for something hidden deep in the Appalachians, of which he wasn't sure. He told me that I need to go to 156 Main Street in Morgantown to find them. As our conversation continued, we delved into a variety of enlightening topics, sharing our thoughts and opinions on numerous matters. I recounted my experiences at Hermes's Institute, which piqued his interest. He remarked, "I haven't encountered anyone from that school in 25 years. It's quite unfortunate. It used to be highly regarded among the societies. However, a few years ago, they decided to seek government funding, and in order to qualify for it, they had to start offering real classes." This revelation led us to discuss the implications of academic institutions bending to external influences and the potential erosion of their core values. We pondered the effects of such changes on the integrity of these establishments and the quality of the education they provided. We found common ground in our belief that pursuing knowledge for its own sake was a noble endeavor, and our shared passion for learning made our conversation all the more engaging. As we continued to share our perspectives on life and the pursuit of knowledge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with this man, who was once a stranger. It was as if fate had brought us together in this tavern, and the encounter had imbued my journey with a newfound sense of purpose and direction. As the evening wore on, I started to feel the weight of exhaustion. Glancing around the dimly lit tavern, my eyes settled on a clock hanging on the wall, which read 1:30. Time had slipped away from me. I expressed my gratitude to the man for his company and guidance, informing him that I needed to find rest. He responded warmly, "It was a pleasure meeting you. Be sure to visit me again after you've discovered what you're searching for, traveler." I located a nearby hotel, checked in, and as soon as my head hit the pillow, I fell into a deep slumber. Surprisingly, I awoke the next morning at 9 a.m., despite my usual habit of sleeping in after a night of drinking. Although I hadn't indulged heavily, it was still uncharacteristic. Regardless, I had only booked the room for one night, and it seemed best to continue my journey. I stepped outside the hotel to be greeted by a cold yet sunny day that somehow reassured me I was on the right path. With renewed determination, I headed to the train station and purchased a one-way ticket to Wheeling, West Virginia. After a very long train ride, I arrived in Wheeling and began my trek to Morgantown. As I reached the city and the address given to me by the man in the tavern, the hour was close to midnight, As if guided by destiny, the building at the address was illuminated, with shadows of people visible against the drawn curtains. Little did I know that my next journey would be one for the ages. I knocked on the door and awaited a response. It took me a while to convince them to even let me in, but once they did, they realized that I was a student of the occult. After some talking and formalities, they explained their predisposition and clued me in on Wardensville. Throughout all my travels, none were as haunting and memorable as my journey through the abandoned town of Wardensville. You see, I had been sent on an expedition there by just one of the many secret societies that operate in the darkest recesses of the Appalachians. Although it should be noted that I had no respect for this particular group, as they were little more than a cabal of charlatans and madmen obsessed with the pursuit of forbidden knowledge at any cost. They fancied themselves as wood elves and spoke to each other in Bosmer. The sound of this enigmatic language could only be described as a cacophonous blend of guttural growls and sibilant whispers, like the chittering of some vast, malevolent insect horde. Nonetheless, they offered me a large sum of money to find and explore this long-forgotten town, as no one from there or of the other societies had ever managed to relocate it. They told me that in the early 1900s a Hungarian immigrant had moved to Wardensville and had brought with him an ancient tome, written by his ancestors in a language they dubbed Gypsy, but what I knew better as either Romani or Hungarian. They went on to further state that this immigrant was presumably killed by the townsfolk, but were honest enough to state that all other history regarding Wardensville has been lost to even the most knowledgeable of the occult. It was 6 weeks of trudging through densely packed forests, hollows, steep slopes thick with foliage, and dank swamps, with the only company being the ceaseless rustling of the undergrowth and the eerie, persistent calls of cicadas and crickets. It was only when I came across a dilapidated B&O railroad station that I applied myself with renewed vigor in my search. The station was built in 1863, as indicated by the founding brick, of which the date was still legible. The building itself was already collapsed, the founding brick laying neatly and square in the otherwise chaotic pile of rubble. The symmetrical image of the brick amidst uneven, jagged, rotting ruins filled me with a sense of unease. It was only when I looked at what could have only been the rusted skeleton remains of a train car, filled with orange-gray spikes that were once box springs, shooting up into the air in odd, non-Euclidean angles, as if defying the laws of geometry and reason. As if alive and writhing with an unholy vitality that defied all logic and reason. Gaining this sickening insight with just a mere glance, I was immediately and violently thrusted into a mad vision of these spikes writhing in a vile rhythm, as if they were the limbs of some monstrous creature that had been fused with the train car in a blasphemous ritual. My faith in a beautiful God and strong German will spared me from further mental anguish and snapped me out of the twisted fever dream. I had to go past the train car in order to get by the rubble, wreckage, and dense foliage intermingled with mangled tracks. As I squeezed by the ruined boxcar, the air grew thick with the stench of decay and rust, and I could feel the sharp edges of the spikes cutting into my skin like the teeth of some ravenous beast. With each step past it, my body pressed between it, the foliage and the spikes seemed to writhe and twist with a malevolent energy, as if they were hungry for my flesh. A low, haunting moan filled the air, and I knew then that I had stumbled upon something truly sinister. It wasn't more than a minute before I was past it and following the tracks into the damnable, detestable ruins of a holler squalor town. I entered from the south, which runs uphill, then down into the town. At this vantage point you can see a crooked church casting a shadow onto rubble, moss-covered cabins, and the old brick that is only visible in dark red patches. In the shadow these patches resemble voids in space, little black holes that could suck you into the earth below. The church leers over a collapsed factory and loom, its windows empty, allowing one to look into the pitch-black interior. Like most buildings, rubble or standing, it has taken on a green color from the overgrowth of moss. The town below has the church located in the town center. Off to the west side of the church you would see the ruins of the factory. Its walls and roof twisted and crumpled, as if a giant had simply crushed the buildings in the palm of its hand. Further south down the hill and past all the church and ruins lie the cabins, or their remains, and two just barely left standing. The cabins were built in a circle around the loom, which itself is standing despite the fact that only half of its roof has caved in. The boundaries of the town are marked by the dense forest that surrounds it, with the tree line beginning just 300 yards from the nearest building. To the east of the town center, there is an empty space that was once a field, but now it is barely recognizable as such. The town seems frozen in time, surrounded by a foreboding silence that is only occasionally broken by the rustling of leaves or the hoot of an owl. The stillness that had initially seemed peaceful now felt suffocating, like the calm before a storm. Suddenly, a faint whisper reached my ears, so quiet that I almost thought it was my imagination. I strained to listen. "Elphalite,"